All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. Today, I'm sitting across this digital table with Chris Nelson, the CEO of Freedom Service Dogs. Now, today's conversation is all about what does it truly mean to be an alpha? You're going to learn how these little devices that we carry around, aka our cell phones, are distracting us from the human experience. We're going to talk about what it means to lean on your community, to uplift others, but more importantly, some of the challenges that we're facing when it comes to serving and supporting our veterans. And the question that has to be asked, are we doing enough? In today's conversation with Chris Nelson, we take all of this on. Let's get into the episode.
Well, here's where it gets complicated. The device has a lot of great stuff about it too, right? Because there are times and places where you can't connect with loved ones, and it's a way to do that. Whether it's, I keep in touch with like high school buddies only because of social media, right? I have friends that we also talk on the phone and see each other, but there's good in it too. I think the problem is that it's tricked our brains into wiring to, instead of it being a tool that we use integrated with all the other human connection, it's become a substitute for actual human connection, and that's where we've gone wrong. I get a lot of shit out in the world because I'm just always trying to, hey, how you doing? That's just how I live my life. And even my wife will be like, why do you got to be everybody's friend? And I'm like, it's not about being everybody's friend. I think it's about, it fills my soul to engage with people.
Somebody said, like passively in a piece of content or something that I was watching, they said, if you say yes to this right now, you're saying no to something else later. Yeah. And so framing it that way was a big adjustment for me. But it took a long time of trial and error and me falling flat on my fucking face to realize that I am the controller of my ship, which is completely, It's a big responsibility, but you grow into that, Yeah,
it's hard to figure out how we get there, because it's usually a pretty meandering path for most of us to get to a place where we understand that we're the captains. It takes a series of events or one tough lesson to go, wait a minute, I'm responsible wholly for this, and then navigating through that whole process of what does it mean to be responsible, and can I carry that responsibility, and how can I carry that responsibility? It's crazy. Us humans are a fucking mess, dude.
We really are, man. There's an element of accountability, which I feel like is lost today in society. A lot of people are responsible for their actions, right? But they don't want to take accountability for the results that their actions actually cause. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that because one is a statement and one is behavior, right? And so more and more, I think that there's a problem that we have societally in which we've made it easier as a society to say I'm responsible for what I've done. But because of the influences of, and I don't mean this derogatorily, I mean, maybe sometimes it is used sort of maliciously, but this idea of cancel culture, which is not necessarily what we're talking about, but I think there are these external pressures that say, outside of the judicial system, this is how we as a society are going to hold you accountable. And I think there's a natural resistance to being held accountable. And I think if we could intrinsically be more accountable, I mean, you look at restorative justice practices, you look at these things where it's like, you look at AA, 12-step programs, I have to make amends, and it includes doing these things. That's accountability. Losing your job because of a mistake you made and somebody, lighting your world on fire, that's not accountability, that's punishment. And I think that we've started to blur these lines between accountability and punishment. And so I don't know if I'm defending it or not, actually, who cares, but that if you take a step into how we used to take accountability, that's getting diminished because of all the punishment that surrounds us everywhere. And because those two things have gotten conflated, I get it. I'm happy to be accountable in the ways that I can be accountable. Sometimes that can look like, hey, y'all, I made a mistake at work, and I'm going to have to lose some sleep tonight over fixing that while I fix that, right? That's accountability. I don't want to be, none of us want to be punished for mistakes that we make or bad choices that we make, right? Like, again, outside of the judicial system, most people don't want that either. But because of the fear of punishment, we have, I think, are resisting personal accountability. It's a real bummer that we've done that.
And I think there's almost an element of people want to punish others. And so we go into this keyboard warriorism, if you will, where we feel like we can cast blame and cast judgment on people and make them suffer for the things that they've done without the accountability of being the person who's actually delivering the punishment.
That's where there's a real lack of accountability because of the anonymity. Because, you listen to podcasts and occasionally podcasters will say, this is the commentary I get. And, the statistics are out there. There's a bunch of lonely, isolated men who are anonymously criticizing everybody else on the planet to help feel empowered or whatever it is. And it's gotten nasty. And so it's another contributor to I don't want to be accountable because everybody's is punishing me publicly or whatever. It's really hard. Then you get defensive, and then it breaks down this healthy system of the cycle of mistakes, learning, accountability, and change.
There's an interesting, you ever heard the saying, where your attention goes, your energy flows, right? Or something similar to that, right? So there's an interesting concept I heard the other day on a podcast called cognitive bundles. And it was the exact same comment. This guy who was hosting a podcast said, it's so interesting. I'll say one thing on the podcast and I'll have people in the comment section who will react and be like, you're the greatest person ever. I completely agree with what you just said. And the other side of that, the exact same comment is, you're a terrible piece of shit. You should be taken down. You need to be canceled. And what they were talking about in this instance was when we are looking for anger, when we are looking for the good, we can be shown the exact same data set in a comment, in a statement, or whatever the podcast is. And based on how your perception is of yourself is the thing that you're going to see out of that piece of content.
100%. This is the manifestation of, and I'm not saying this about any social or political sort of set of values or activities, but we have created this at the ends of the spectrum of social politics. You can see my hands. It's a bigger spectrum than that, but I was doing this. Is 8% on either end of that spectrum, left or right? Very, very progressive, very, very conservative, however you want to define it. And I don't mean this relative to democracy. I mean it socially. Is that both sides of that spectrum is this adoption of victimhood. And if you are a victim of or looking to use that card, and I don't say that disparagingly about people who are actually victims of anything. I mean this social mentality of well, you said this thing and I'm ready to hear that as a victim. Well, then I'm going to lash out at you. And that is not just the quote unquote woke or just the quote unquote MAGA. That is both. At the ends of the spectrum, this giant sensitivity to you've hurt me. When in fact, the innately or substantively, that thing is innocuous. It's benign. Right? I say I love dogs, and there are people who have been bit by a dog, and they're like, "You're traumatizing me," and it's no, I just said I love dogs, and that, you know what I mean?
100%.
I can understand that you don't love dogs because you got bit by a dog, but I'm not doing something wrong to you by liking dogs or stating that, and that's the ends of the spectrum that we're really challenged by, and those are the keyboard warriors.
Do you think, in our previous conversation, I might have mentioned 2022, Surgeon General comes on to a national broadcast, biggest threat to the American society, not another viral pandemic, but an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. Do you think that we spend so much time in this digital world? The average 18-year-old today spends about 9 hours behind their screen, meaning they spend more time on their screen than they do asleep, meaning they are spending more time literally in a digital world than they are in a dream world. We are starting to think about the lack of connection in that space, where now we're almost falling into these ideals of victimhood because maybe that's a deep down scream for attention and connection for other people to look at us and care about us. Do you think about that?
I think about it a lot. I used to do a lot of work in the space of trauma, being trauma informed, understanding how trauma works in the brain, that kind of stuff. And, we have sort of these adverse experiences in our lives, and then we have protective factors, right? And so what you're describing is the adverse event that is isolation. We've tricked ourselves. Even you and I talking online here, we're still isolated. I'm still alone in this space. You're still alone in that space.
Yep.
And we've tricked ourselves into believing that we're engaging with people, but we're not, because there's no energy exchange. There's no, the nonverbals aren't really there. I don't know if you got what's in your environment that's impacting, we're not connected. So if we call that isolation in this context an adverse event in our lives, or the adversity of being isolated, the protective factor balancing that is inclusion, is community, is belonging, is connection. We don't get to access those protective factors if we believe that this is those things. That me on Facebook putting an opinion about a flag or whatever, and I've got people liking that or hating it or whatever, I'm not actually engaging with anybody. They don't give a shit. Not really. Or they're doing the same thing of like, I've tricked myself into believing that I'm engaging. The truth of the matter is you come out of those exchanges more lonely. It's this big. I understand that there's convenience in remote work. I understand there are some positions that are best remote, whatever. But we still battle with that in businesses of like trying to have our employees come back to the office. It's not to punish them. It's not because you can't get projects done online. You can get those things done online. But the magic of human connection is where the real work. That's where the work happens. That's where the good
It's
shit
like
comes
we've
out.
almost fallen for the instant gratification trap.
Yeah,
Where we
give me the
think
Oreo now.
Exactly. And it's very difficult to articulate from a leadership perspective that coming together in an office environment, although it might be a little bit inconvenient, because the world that we live in society today is all about convenience. Stuff comes to my door next day or same day with Amazon. I can get food, groceries, everything delivered.
I
But
don't have to leave my house.
the human connection, the human element of life and business cannot be replaced. And I think we need to hear more leaders talk about that human connection rather than the fact that I have the overhead of rent in the building that I rented out for us with this lease and XYZ, because there's no tangible connection to that in the human experience.
Well, also, I don't give a shit about your rent. If I'm like an employee whose job is to, make sure that we have the right marketing collateral for things. I promise you, my concern isn't whether or not this CEO or that leader is paying rent. What I'll say is that the rent's going to get paid anyway, and so that's not a reason for me to do something. It's like anything else. People need to have a reason to do things, and I told you so is never one of them. If I told you so worked, bro, we'd have no problems on this planet.
I agree, right? There'd be
Yeah,
no rebellion against mom and dad. There'd be no
that's right.
problems. We wouldn't be doing
Yeah.
anything.
If telling people what to do worked, then we'd be clear. It would be boring, but we wouldn't have conflict. We wouldn't have people in these positions of isolation, et cetera, because somebody would go onto the Facebook or Insta or TikTok or whatever the platform is and say, "Hey, put down your phone and go play with your friends, or go get dirty, or go like breathe the same air as other people for a little while and touch somebody with consent." But like give your kid a hug, get off the
Yeah.
screens for a bit. Then, and if people did that, then we wouldn't be here. But um, the substitute to that is like, why? I have, when I started at this job, there's a big whiteboard in our conference room where all these meetings take place. And I wrote two things on this conference board in permanent Sharpie. The first one, underlined, all caps, is talk about it. Just talk about it. Whatever the thing is, just have a conversation. And I'll get to my email perspective in a second, if you would let me, because I have feelings. And then over on the corner in big all caps is why. What's the reason? Why are we doing this thing? Why are we having this conversation? And we miss all of that because we're so entrenched. We think that email is a form of communication. It's not. It's a tool to relay information. It's not communication. And so I get a lot of shit at work about how I'm not responding to emails from somebody who works 40 feet away from me. And I have to sort of remind people. I mean, some of it is just like playful, right? Like give me a heart, jabbing me playfully. But some of it's real, right? Where people are like, well, I sent you an email. And I'm like, well, do you remember that 5 minutes after that, I came and sat down in your office and we talked about that thing that you sent the email about? And it's so much richer. It's so much more efficient to just have a conversation. But we've become so accustomed to, I'm going to fire off this email at 1 o'clock in the morning because I can't get it out of my head. And then I have some expectation at 9 o'clock in the morning that you're responding to that, or if you're up at 5, that you're responding to it. And in the meat of that, we're driving divides between us in our work rather than coming together and collaborating in our work. It just makes me crazy.
Talk about it. Eliminates all of the perception of what is not said. Do you know what I mean? It's very interesting how it's very human to get upset about somebody not doing something that we expect of them, but we never told them how what they do actually makes us feel. We're always
Right.
filling in the gap. So it's like, talk
Always.
about it, eliminates the gap.
Well, if you create an opportunity for someone's imagination to tell a story, it's going to be the wrong one almost every time, right? And talk about it is sort of factual and directive. Have a conversation, but it's also, even in the stuff, people, nobody likes conflict. You'll meet people who are like, hey, I like conflict. No, you don't. You like being a bully if you
Yep.
love conflict. Getting comfortable with conflict means being able to manage through it and have a conversation that's difficult. The talk about it is not just, hey, you should talk about it. It's also, we need to collectively create a culture where there's psychological safety, where we can talk about things, even if they're hard. And I think we're missing that in the world too. It's these verbal blows, often anonymously or whatever, that prevent us from, what's the actual problem and how do we work together to solve it? And if we just don't, like, if you and I inherently and from a values perspective disagree on something, we have to learn to accept, like, I'm not changing your mind and you're not changing my mind, but where is there also in our lives a place that we intersect? So it's not going to be about porta potties or whatever random thing, but maybe it can be about the power of sharing energy with people. I don't, like, relative to the conversation we've been having.
No, I mean, you're right. There's the human experience in itself, and this is why I love having the podcast, is because when we share our ideas and share our stories, it's very easy for other people to find themselves in that story or that idea, because the human experience is a shared one. And I feel like it's so easy for us, especially in this digital divide. I can't believe you even just pointed that out. You were like, although we're having this conversation, you're sitting there by yourself. And I looked around and I was like, dude, it's quiet as shit here in my house. And I really am sitting here with headphones in, talking to a screen where nobody else can hear me. But I've become used to this element of communication. It's I hope that we can get past this, because it seems like the antidote to the problems that we see in society today are all of us just coming together. There was a story. I had this guy on the podcast. His name is Dr. Rob Kelly. He's out of Texas. He does a lot of substance use and rehabilitation stuff. He has a program that says 97% of the people who come through my program don't relapse again, which is pretty outrageous to think about, right? From a statistical perspective.
Absurdity.
I know. And so he was talking about, he shared a story on the podcast one time. He was like, there was a story about this guy who went to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco and ended up throwing himself off the bridge. He ended up passing away when he hit the water, like so many people do, unfortunately. The police officers brought this guy out of the water. They pulled out his wallet, which was in his ID. They went back to his apartment. He wrote a note. The note said, "Today is the day where I'm not going to be here anymore. There's only one thing that can stop me from doing this. On my 3-mile walk from my apartment to the bridge, if one person just looks at me and smiles, I'm not going to do it today."
I've heard
It
that
makes me
story.
emotional to think about,
It's
man.
it's tragic that we can interact in this world with such disregard for each other. That's what that is. That's just complete disregard for other human beings. I make it a policy of mine to, like I go to the same gas station all the time in my little town, and I know everybody who works there's name. How are you doing today? What's cooking? There's all kinds of verbal stuff, but I don't think there's a person in this world who doesn't deserve to be seen. And I don't think that there's anything uncool about being kind all the time. I mean, there are times where, like, you got to tell somebody to fuck off in no uncertain terms, but um, yeah, to walk 3 miles past people in a crowded city and not have anybody just engage with you, smile, make eye contact, is
We're being sucked away from the human experience, man. Do you know what I mean? It's like I look around every single day, and as I've gotten older, I've become more observant. I look around at everybody, and I can't tell you how many times I've missed an opportunity to give somebody a compliment or to have a genuine conversation because everybody's always doing this. If you
yeah.
can see the podcast today, I'm looking down at my phone. Every social situation, every opportunity where it feels a little bit weird, we're always going to this device and we're taking ourselves away from this current moment. And when I think about the element of distraction that is in our lives today, no matter what part of generations you're in, you are having your life experience taken away from you because you're spending so much fucking time on this device. It's insane to me.
It's insane. I think, well, here's where it gets complicated. The device has a lot of great stuff about it too, right? Like, because there are times and places where you can't connect with loved ones, and it's a way to do that. Whether it's, I mean, I keep in touch with like high school buddies only because of social media, right? Like, I have friends that we also talk on the phone and see each other, but there's good in it too. I think the problem is that it's tricked our brains into wiring to allow, instead of it being a tool that we use integrated with all of the other human connection, it's become a substitute for actual human connection. And that's where we've gone wrong. I get a lot of shit out in the world because I'm just like always like trying to, hey, how you doing? Like it's just how I live my life. And even my wife will be like, why do you got to be everybody's friend? And I'm like, it's not about being everybody's friend. I think it's about, it fills my soul to engage with people. And I think it's important for other people. And maybe we can model that to a degree in which that person, it's the old chain reaction domino effect of like, if I smile at you today, Keenan, and you were having a hard time and I say, how you doing? You say, I'm not doing so great. And I say something like, it always gets better. Right. um, well, that can change your day. And then you can take the power of that change and change somebody else's day. And it's these little, I mean, it's so cliche. It's these little small acts that I think we built so much of our social construct on that now it took a long time to get to a place where we understood that was an important part of our social architecture. And then in a matter of a decade, we've managed to crumble a lot of that architecture. We're taking the frame out and replacing it with what we've been talking about. Pretend.
It's interesting
That's
to
not
me
where
that I know that this was
we've gone down the hole.
yeah, but I mean, this is an important conversation because I think a lot of people are thinking this, and I was going to share a quote which is interesting to me. It's when we live our truth, often we show others how they have been living their lie. The ability to communicate with others, right? Even like my father is the exact same way. He is the person who is literally chatting up everybody in every single restaurant, every single place of business, where our PO box is at, our bank, everywhere. I walk in, they're like, "Hey, how's your dad? He's so funny. I love that dude." And I'm like, "Oh man." But when I think about the things that I'll remember him for when he's gone, it's those elements of him living his truth and me reflecting back on it and being like, were you just too chicken to be the exact same way? Because having a conversation with people and getting out of your shell is scary for a lot, but it often brings so much reward when you can share that human connection with other people.
Well, it's that ability to be vulnerable to the benefit of ourselves and those around us, right? Like, because it is hard. It's hard to be, what if they don't like me? What if the amount of times that I say hey to somebody or like just a friendly gesture of some kind and they don't even respond, or like, I've somehow frightened them by saying, hey, I hope you have a good day, whatever. Um, should have taught me not to put myself out there, right? Like, well, you're a fool for being this way. And so, people are like, well, you're just gregarious or, whatever the thing is. It actually takes a lot sometimes to move past the sort of negative interactions and say, I'm still going to be friendly to everybody that I see. And if they don't like it, that's okay. I don't have control over that. And like my dad's the same way. And it's this thing where it's like everybody's his friend everywhere he goes. And and it's hard to do. I think people look at it and they go, "Oh, it's just so easy. It's just who they are." No, it's a choice. You have to make a choice to put yourself out there, knowing that the response may not be as charitable.
There's a lot of things that you could have done in your life with all of your skills. And I know that at one point in time, you made a choice to do the work that you do. And I want to kind of direct the conversation with the
Well, here we
amazing
go.
work that you're doing.
Now we're going to talk.
Now we're into it. So, in our previous conversation, you said, we as a country do an amazing job honoring and celebrating our veterans, but we don't do a great job of taking care of them. What does that mean?
Oh, it means just that, like, right? Like I think we say thank you for your service a lot. I think, and that's important. I'm not. I want to be really clear that like thank you for your service is mandatory, right? Like freedom ain't free, baby. So whether or not we believe that this one person's actions have allowed us the liberty to live our lives in the way that we want to doesn't matter, because that's the intent behind why they engaged in that service and made the sacrifices they made. And so thank you for your service is really important. However, thank you for your service, and that we allow for the suicide rate to be as high as it is, means that there's something disconnected between saying I appreciate you and showing I appreciate you. And so, you even look at, I don't want to speak disparagingly on the VA, but that's a bureaucratic system that is letting people down for whatever reasons. And that's its own whole podcast with 75 different guests talking about all of that. And the reality of, maybe to give an example of, we had an event in West Texas last week, and had brought along a couple of our veteran clients to tell their story about the service dog, their connection to freedom service dogs in this community. And, I'm feeling like, man, you took time out of your life to come talk about freedom service dogs with a group of people. All you people that are here have taken time out of your life to support this mission of this organization. I was just filled with gratitude, right? It's like pouring out of me. And to have the experience of having conversation with Kyle specifically, I spent a bunch of time with this guy. His dog is Merengue. It's the cutest partnership. To say, hey, look, thank you so much for taking time out of your life to come help with this. Really appreciate it. And to hear, and it's not the only time I've heard it, but to hear him say, no, 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 no. I'm the one who's appreciative for this opportunity to talk about this thing, to share my experience, to give back to this community that's given so much to me, is so humbling. And that's what I say when we're not taking good enough care of our veterans. That's what I mean. We're not understanding the impact of what, I mean, look, at face value, a service dog is not a huge thing. For the people that are partnered with these dogs, it becomes a life-changing bond. It's the tasks, it's the companionship, it's all of the things. And it is a small gesture in the big world of all the things that we could be doing. And to see the gratitude, and people tear up when they talk about their appreciation of what is, again, like in the grand scheme of things, a small gesture, says, whoa, shit, you all are not getting enough of the kind of support, community relationships that you need to feel. We were talking about this earlier. If you're isolated, the answer to that is a sense of belonging. And veterans are isolated. They come back to this world. Welcome home, veterans. They come back to this world that can be unfamiliar and can be scary, and where, how do I access these things that I need? That's isolating. Whether it, you talk about PTSD, I know people who haven't left their home in a very long time because going out triggers that PTS. And so let's invite veterans. I mean, everybody, but in this case, let's talk about taking care of veterans means inviting them and letting them know they belong and are valued, which is much more than saying thank you for your service, or having a day, one day a year where we're like, yeah, happy Veterans Day. Um, that's not, it's just not enough.
Yeah, there's no way a thank you or a day on the calendar could ever repay the debt, right? That these men and women signed up to potentially sacrifice for all of us. And I feel like us coming together as a country and recognizing that there are some people who need and deserve more support than others is an honest conversation. You know what I mean? Like, we're not all treated equally and we're not all created equally, very transparently, because some of us choose harder paths and they sacrifice more than other people do. And I feel like this element of saying we're all the same sometimes needs to be challenged, you know?
Well, look, I mean, we talk about, I want to tell you the way that a colleague and friend of mine talks about the service side of things really quickly. But first, I'll say, uh, when we talk about diversity, and that's a big conversation, right? People have asked me, why is diversity important? And it's because we all have unique experience and perspective to add to something. And the more of that that we can have, the better the outcome of whatever that thing is that we're working toward, right? Like echo chambers simply don't work. You get the same old shit. Um, the the power of diversity is not about skin color, ethnicity. I think those things are relevant, but diversity is about just what you're saying. We're all different. You and I will see this conversation that we're having here differently, right? It's impacting you differently based on your life experience and your perspectives, and same with me. And so let's acknowledge, honor, and see the strength in how we all see things differently. Even if we're in the same thing, hearing and seeing the same thing, we experience it differently, and there's value to that, and we shy away from it. So back to what Chris Boyer says. He's a colleague. He's our veteran services coordinator. He's a Marine combat veteran. He's one of the most impassioned people I know around making sure that we're taking care of our veterans. And so I learn from him all the time. And he said, when we sign up for service, we write a blank check. And sometimes the price on that check, when it gets cashed, is the ultimate price. Sometimes it's adding nickels to it every day. And either way, it just gets big. And it's incredible that we are not choosing a society to acknowledge the cost associated with the path that is in the best interests of our country to protect our freedoms. Yeah, that's sort of the grounding. That's one way to frame it, but that's sort of the grounding of like why we do the work that we do. Is we have a duty.
And when I sit here in the gravity of what you're saying, it almost makes you question, right? And the answer is no, but are we doing enough? And the answer is absolutely not.
Well, then you say, what is enough? What is the answer to what is enough? And I think back to the, like, we all have different experiences and perspective and all of that wonderful difference that we all have is that the only way we can get to what is enough is to engage the people who have the experience of being a combat veteran or being a veteran that has been injured due to their service or made sacrifices, all of them, because of their service. And I don't think we're doing that. I think we say, oh, here's the deal. You get these benefits and you get this thing, and you can call this number if you're feeling suicidal. I don't think we're doing a whole lot of like, what is it that we can do better? And so that's a conversation that we're, need to continue to build on a national level of, and it's true everywhere. It's like, why can't we just listen more to what people need and figure out how we can get there? And maybe it's not tomorrow, but we can do an awful lot, man, if we really want to.
The willingness to listen is something that I've been talking a lot about on the podcast recently, in education, in nonprofits, all these different type of things. It seems like we have certain people or certain, I would say, demographics of our society who are making decisions for others with no lived experience and no user input, if you will. We're creating these solutions in a vacuum and then taking them to the marketplace and saying, here you go. And it's like, this is great,
Right.
but I can't live underneath this cup. You know what I mean? I can drink from it
Right.
and I can eat from it, but I can't live underneath this, and I need a place to live right now. It's an interesting dichotomy at kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, it's a societal cancer to say that we have answers to things without involving the people that have that lived experience in any way. It's why it's important that we hire our clients. We have a prison program, so there are people who are incarcerated who have gone through a lot of training to learn how to train these pups. They go in about 8 weeks. They're there for about 8 weeks, and I believe so firmly that sure, that's awesome, and it's a great part of what we do. But let's hire them when they get out, and let's listen to their experience and help that inform what we're doing. And that's true for that program. It's true for our, let's hire our clients. They have the actual experience of having worked here and can help us do it better. And point out that, like, well, when I was going through the program, you can't just do feedback surveys of people and say, like, what was your experience like? Did you, rating 1 to 5, did you like the food? You have to bring people into the fold and let them say, when it's safe for them to say so, let them say, I think we're not doing this part right, and really truly listen to that. I think the problem that we face with so much, and it's true about a lot of people in the leadership space, is that they think they're the smartest in the room, or that they have to have the answer to things, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And it can be very threatening when somebody says, hey, I think we're not doing this part right. It's very important that anybody who's in a leadership position, whether it's business or football, the list goes on and on, for profit, not for profit, doesn't feel threatened by good ideas that weren't theirs. And we have a problem, I think, in most places where leaders go, oh, that wasn't my idea, so we're not going to do it. They don't say that out loud. They make up some excuse or whatever. And so by bringing people with a lived experience in and allowing a safe enough environment where they can say, hey, I'm going to challenge this thing because of my experience, just makes us better. I don't do this shit for glory. I'm responsible for something, and I take that responsibility seriously. And so, you can't, I don't think that you can do it right if you're not going to be vulnerable and say, I don't know. I don't need to know because there's a group of experts in the room. I just need to help support them and make sure they have the resources to do the things that they're really good at.
I feel like this is a huge misconception in the nonprofit space as well. A lot of people think that nonprofits are here just because it feels good. We want to hand out hugs. We're good people. We want to have a positive impact. But what people need to realize is that this is an actual business that is grounded in impact, and we're trying to make things happen here. And I know that you had some opinions about that in our last conversation as well.
Oh boy, these transitions are slick. The number of conversations that I have with people, so I'm like super branded most of the time. I've got my blazer's got freedom, my hat's got freedom. And people are like, well, what's freedom? Service dogs. It's why I brand it all the time, right? To create those opportunities for conversation and open up the door and bring people into our community. And obviously general brand promotion, which is any company. And I'll talk to people, if people engage, I'll talk to them for a little bit. I've got my little elevator pitch I do, and they want to know more information. And so I carry business cards with me at all times. They have QR codes on them. They've got my name and title. It's a picture of a dog. And it's got my cell phone number on it, which people think is wild, but I think is valuable. And they'll say, oh, you're president and CEO of that. Like, what do you do for work? They'll say to me. Because of this perception that, like, we're all volunteers and we all,
Yeah.
And I try not to be offended because it's just an opportunity to educate. But deep down inside, I'm like, what do you mean? What do I do? What do you mean? This is what I do for work. This is more than a full-time job. And so I have to break it down for people. And this is how I break it down, that nonprofits are businesses. As the CEO of a nonprofit, I'm an employer. I employ, 65 people, I think, today. And that, yes, we're here to fulfill a mission, but it's people's jobs, it's people's livelihood, it's people's career path. It's the same thing as any other company on the planet. The only difference with us, aside from mission, which is obvious, is that revenue is a different game. The expenses are the same as any other business. We're just not trading anything for money, and that, I will say, isn't true either. When we ask people to give money to our cause, and I talk about it with people, especially if it's someone sitting down to write a big check, um, there is a transaction in that. We're selling an opportunity for people to contribute to something that's really meaningful. And that, have you ever given money to charity?
Yeah,
Yeah, you're going to also to Freedom at some point in the near future.
absolutely. 100%.
We'll
100%.
negotiate that offline, and every nickel matters. So, but what happens is that, how do you feel after you give money to a mission that you care about?
You feel good, man. You feel like you're contributing to something bigger than yourself personally.
Yeah, we're selling that. That's what we sell to our donors, right? That we're able to allow people to feel connected, to feel that joy, to feel, the contribution isn't just I gave this, it's look at the impact of what my $10, what my $100,000, whatever it is to you, has. And so that impact is changing people's lives. The stories of people who haven't been in the grocery store in 10 years and now are going to concerts for the first time and getting back out into the world, and not worrying about going to bed at night, not worrying about coming home from work and walking back into their empty apartment or home because of that trauma or because of mobility related risks that exist for people. That's the kind of joy and independence and freedom that you're contributing to when you help support this organization. And other ones are like, maybe you're making sure someone's got a full belly tonight. Maybe you're making, whatever it is that people are supporting. That is it's filling our cups when we do things for other people. And this is like, right, this organization is one way to do that. There are a million ways to do that. So it's not transactional in the sense of, you hand me this and I hand you that. It's more, you contribute to this and now you're part of this thing that is so critically important and feels really good. I mean, even when we've got problems at work, I sleep so well knowing that this little puppy that is so cute and fluffy, one day, I bring puppies home from work for like a weekend to my kids. And they're like, puppy, puppy, puppy. And I'm helping them learn about service, right? That we're actually responsible for this dog becoming this thing, right? And so we're gonna lead with that. That every one of these dogs, puppy through adulthood, is maybe saving a life, for sure changing a life to some degree, sometimes to a small degree, sometimes to a very big degree. And who wouldn't want to be a part of that in whatever way they can be a part of it?
I smile on my face because one of the areas that we said,
because I asked you for money.
because you got my donation. I'm already subconsciously writing that check for you guys.
Yeah, I rang the little bell over here. You didn't hear it.
The thing that I think about, which is awesome, is we're talking about compassion. We're talking about happiness. We're talking about connection. We're talking about joy. We're talking about creating experiences for other people. And this, from my perspective, is what great leadership is about. And in today's society, this is what being a true alpha is really about, is being willing to help others, create safe spaces for others, give people a podium that they can stand on that maybe they had taken away from them. And I think that society has this all fucked up right now. But it's amazing to see amazing leaders like you who are fighting for the things that truly matter.
Well, that's really kind. I take issue with the alpha stuff, especially because of working with dogs. We talk a lot about alphas lead the pack. And this is a dysfunction in a lot of leadership these days. Alphas lead the pack. Alphas are the strongest. Well, let's translate those. Alphas lead the pack. An alpha wolf is leading the pack but it's the first one going through 3 feet of snow. It's doing the most work so the other wolves can follow in its tracks. So that's leadership, is plowing through so that other people have it easier to follow you, right? They're actually working the hardest. Or maybe not the hardest, but they're doing hard work, right? I hate that working harder than stuff, but alpha, it's not that they're like getting carried around on a throne like us humans have decided alpha is. They're hustling for the greater good, right? Um, the sacrifices that real alpha people make are significant. You look at every scenario where you can say this human behavior is truly alpha. And I think, all right, because we're serving veterans, let's go to a combat situation. Um, the real alphas are first. So more likely to encounter something adverse, more likely to, right? And yet as a society we go, well, the alpha is just this asshole sitting in the golden throne telling people what to do, and have somehow decided that that's okay. And so anytime I hear someone say I'm an alpha male, I just kind of scoff and I'm like, bro, anybody who's truly alpha in any way would never say that. I report to let's just say the number is 65 staff members. In the context of like who's alpha, like relative to the way we have set it up as a society, they're all alpha to me. They're all the people that I report to, that I'm responsible to. Good leadership it doesn't come from the back, right? Good leadership comes from the front. You're pulling, not pushing. And I think that, yeah, I think we fucked it up real good. Sorry about my language, but you started.
Bring it.
Yeah, I think we've messed it up pretty handily around this idea that machismo or aggression, those kinds of things are alpha. And I wish that we could understand, not just to sort of help fix the minds of people who have adopted that in some way. I think we'd be a kinder world if we actually understood what leadership was as a society. It's so hard for people to define what leadership is and what a leader is and what a leader does. And I think it's really complex, which is why it's hard to define. But it is not barking at people. It is not telling people what to do. It's modeling. It's showing what vulnerability is for the greater good. It's doing this shitty thing for the greater good. It's I could make a lot more money if I was in the for-profit sector, but and so it's not. I'm not. I make a living, so I'm not. It's. I want to be really clear. I'm not pouting about my income, but one could argue it's a sacrifice I make financially to do this thing that I'm passionate about. It feels good to me, so there's reward other than that. But if we could all get behind that a little bit better, of like, yeah, I could be more greedy, or I could be more bossy, or I could be more quote unquote respected. There's a cost to all of that, and too many people aren't paying it.
Why shouldn't leaders change if the world has changed so much, so drastically, even in the last 12 years, 10 years, decade? You know what I mean?
Why shouldn't leaders change?
Why shouldn't they change? Like being the definition of alpha back in the day, right? Of being tough-nosed and barking at people and being that guy, right? Was for a world that we don't live in anymore. The world has changed, and so do the leaders in this new generation have to change as well. There's a book that I have on my desk all the time. It's by a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk. It's called 12 and a Half. And the subtitle of this book is Leveraging the Emotional Ingredients Necessary for Business Success. And he talks about the great leaders of the future are not going to be the guys who rule with an iron fist and are a tyrant like Steve Jobs, but they're going to be able to have kind candor, compassionate conversations, deploy empathy, and be able to be curious enough about what the future is going to look like to inspire other people around them to execute on a mission. And that in itself is a different definition of a leader than where we came from in the past.
1,000%. And I'm going to challenge you with much love and say the great leaders of our future are not going to be men. or not
Mm.
going to just be, you said, the guys who, and I just want to like, I
Ladies as
think
well.
I think one of the great societal changes is there are more and more women in positions of leadership, which challenges a little bit of that like machismo. Let's take misogyny aside, the sort of way we do things, and it's because women are better critical thinkers. Women are socially reinforced to be more compassionate, right?
Yep.
Like I think that we're all equally from birth capable of compassion, but so many guys just get it kicked out of them or told, don't be soft, or words I won't use on this podcast or generally because I have a daughter and a wife and sisters, and the list goes on and on. But they hear a lot of that messaging, and women don't hear as much of that. I think one of the intersections that I see a lot is where women in leadership positions that came up years ago have had to, because of the environment of the men that they were around, had to have this certain kind of way they show up.
100%.
And now that we've gotten to a place with emerging leaders, women, men, etc., that they are allowed to be thoughtful and compassionate and use critical thinking and use collaborative energy and all those things. I think we're seeing this great shift in what female leadership looks like specifically, but then the impact that has on leadership in general. And I agree that I don't know how Steve Jobs functioned. I was never around the dude, but you do this because I said so. Again, this is like a theme. It just doesn't work. It's how can we together find a way to do this thing, and what are you responsible and accountable for within that? And so it takes bravery, I think, to be in a leadership role and be vulnerable at the same time. And it's a choice that we have to make. And I think that we're seeing more and more people make it, thankfully.
Chris, this has been an absolute joy. Having you on the podcast, having this conversation has been incredible. One of the traditions that we have here on the podcast is our previous guests ask our current guest a question. When it's all done, what impact do you hope your work has on your community?
Can I preface this? I know like a succinct answer is good, and I'm going to try to get there, but I believe our work is about every stakeholder group. So the answer differs based on those stakeholder groups. For our clients specifically, I hope the impact our work has is that we do create a community in which people feel like they belong and are connected to and can contribute to in whatever way they need to or want to, which is bigger than giving somebody a dog, right? Even one of these really incredibly well-trained custom dogs. It's that people have a sense of belonging to this community that we've created. And then, right, you can go down the list and I won't do it all, but for staff, I want the impact to be that they learn about their own career pathway and what a healthy business community can look like, and bring that to nobody's staying at Freedom Service Dogs forever that works there. Well, maybe people will, but I mean, a lot of people are going to, go pursue other things in their lives, etc. But that they can bring some of the values that we have around respect and vulnerability and conversations and compassion out to everywhere. So it's that viral spread, right? And so then you go through volunteers, donors. The impact I want for my donors is that they feel like they've helped accomplish those things, that they're a piece of that because of them, ultimately to the clients, that impact happens. And there are a billion stakeholder groups, so I'm not going to waste our time, but ultimately it's that our community grows in a way that impacts other communities too.
It's easy to see from the outside looking in how the work that you and the team do every single day the impact is multiplicative. You're impacting so many lives, you're impacting so many perceptions, you're impacting so many different areas of society where we need more support, man. So Chris, I just want to say, brother, thanks for coming on the show, man. This has been a
Oh,
blast.
that's the jam. It's been a real honor for me too, Keenan. I hope this isn't the last time we talk.
I completely agree. All right, guys,
Uh,
everybody who's been tuning in and watching today, Chris Nelson, man, thanks for coming on the show, brother. Really appreciate it.
brother,
That's a wrap.
thanks again.